Hello, and welcome to the latest Urban Manifesto webinar. It's Tuesday, so that means it must be Urban Manifesto, right? I'm Lucy Bullivant, and I'm the founder of urbanista.org, web scene for livable urbanism. And together with my colleague Prathima Manohar, founder of the Urban Vision Think Do Tank, we created Urban Manifesto this year, back in May, a really exciting new series of weekly webinars. In each episode, we present the personal manifestos of our expert guests from way across different disciplines and backgrounds. These are manifestos for healthier, happier, more livable, and that means more equitable and resilient urban futures. And then we explore the issues in a Q&A, and we invite you, our audience members, to ask them questions. So, the pandemic, with the massive demands that it brings of transitioning into a new era, has provoked profound questions concerning the identities, the policies, and the processes of urban design, planning, architecture, and related disciplines. And this crisis has accelerated what was already a huge need to change course on every single front imaginable. So in helping to meet the challenges brought about by COVID, and at the same time, the climate emergency, and nurture a genuinely livable future in the process, Urban Manifesto offers opportunities to learn and also opportunities to unlearn old ways that have lost their relevance or which are downright unhelpful at this point in the 21st century. We're tackling a myriad of themes. They range from co-housing to healthy buildings. Is density a boon or bane? Making cities more mobile, and many others. And we've started to build an exciting focus on plans for specific neighborhoods and cities globally, starting with Copenhagen. So we'd love you to keep watching our episodes, bringing together the Urban Manifesto Urban Reset Roadmap for progressive, resilient, and responsible urban change as the series advances. You can watch all the episodes that we've made to date on YouTube and Facebook if you look under the Urban Vision. So now it's over to Prathima to introduce today's theme and our speaker. Prathima.
Thank you, Lucy. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of Urban Manifesto. Today, we're going to be discussing data-driven city and how we can empower our cities through data. And we are so thrilled to have Professor Sarah Williams joining us. She's currently the Associate Professor of Urban Planning at MIT in Boston. And she's also the Director of the Civic Data Design Lab at MIT's School of Architecture and Planning as well. And the lab works with data, maps, and mobile technologies to develop interactive design and communication strategies that bring urban policy issues to a broader audience. And she's currently, she's just in the process of coming out with a new book called Data Action that's going to be published by MIT Press. And it focuses on how to use data as a tool for empowerment rather than oppression. Sarah, it's so lovely to see you. I know you're in New York. How have you been in the last 6 to 8 months?
Well, thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm just really excited to be chatting with you. And, I've looked and known about your work, so it was really excited to participate with you guys today. Doing good as well as everybody can under the pandemic, trying to learn new things. I always ask my students at the beginning of class, what is the new thing that they learned under the pandemic? I think we all have done something interesting and new with ourselves for sure.
And I know you have your manifesto for how we should think about data-driven cities. So I'm just going to pull up your slides so you can share your manifesto for future of the data city.
Sure. Can I share my screen or yeah.
I've shared your slides, Sarah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so maybe I'll just click next so that, and sorry, I'll tell you next, or can I control the slides? Is it okay? Oh no.
I'll have to
You have to share it. Okay, I can't share it. Okay, so let's go back and I'll click next. Sorry, we should have talked about that before.
Yeah.
So in the last decade, we have created unprecedented. Oh, sorry, not next yet. Sorry. Can we go back to the beginning?
Okay, this seems to be a video. Yeah.
Okay, yes, it is. So in the last decade, we've created unprecedented amounts of data. Next. And in the next decade, that amount of data will grow tenfold. Here we're seeing an example of Waymo, Google's autonomous vehicle, and you can just see the amount of data that's created can replicate a digital world. Next. This new digital infrastructure will bring unprecedented change to our urban environment. And so the use of autonomous vehicles, digital environments, and so forth have urban planners and Google, Sidewalk Labs, amongst other, really thinking about how we can share and shift the public realm in a new way. But in all of these images that we see, I often find them to be so clean and precedented. So next, as we use this new digital infrastructure to shape the public realm, we must make sure it's accessible to all publics. And I think, one thing that we often forget as we use data to create and plan our cities is that not everyone has access to some of the new things available. So how can we ensure autonomous vehicles are also available, or subsidies are provided so that those in the lowest income groups can get access to that digital infrastructure? And it's really up to us now to make sure that next is good. We, the people, own the future of the city, and that we really come up with plans, regulations in order for this new digital infrastructure to be shared by all. And what I mean by that, as an example, is if we do create autonomous vehicles, will there be subsidies for those in lower incomes to get access to the new forms of transport? Will there be a street scene like I showed that also is available in lower income communities? If we don't consider all publics as we develop this new digital infrastructure, many could be set to be left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and I loved looking at the little video which is at the start of your presentation. I'm going to try to show it again, where you seem to have a, it looks like amazing graphic, but that looks like it's the autonomous vehicle mapping the city. Is that what's happening there?
Yeah, essentially autonomous vehicles, as they move through the city, they're really creating a new digital world. And this is a great example of that. But I mean, this is just one vehicle, and that the world they need to create for themselves as they move through the environment. So just imagine as we have more and more autonomous vehicles on the road, the amount of data that we have. Google already has collected a lot of this data, and we know that from just Google Maps looking at their Street View. But if you know, those Street View images also create these 3D models. And so they're creating those models in order to begin and start to develop and train the AVs. So right now, autonomous vehicles that are being developed use this world to train themselves, right? So, right, if you think about an autonomous vehicle being a computer, before it even launches on the roadway, it's using this data set to navigate the urban environment. And I think one thing we often don't think about is just, we think about the car on the roadway, but we don't think about the infrastructure in this like really second world that's being created. And this new digital infrastructure, I think we're going to build all kinds of city services on top of, because it doesn't just help cars drive on the roadways, but you can imagine it being used to help blind people navigate the street. But it also can be helpful in understanding the ways in which communities use their public spaces. And as designers, we can use this infrastructure both to think about improvements in design of open space, but also we need to think about how to make sure, as we use this data design, that we're not forgetting all publics. And so I think it's an exciting time for the public realm. I think the way like mobility and how we share the streets has changed significantly, from everything from having Amazon packages delivered to micro mobility to the AV. We're going to really shift the design of cities.
Yeah. And that's fascinating to see that, I never thought about the autonomous vehicle and the amount of data that it was going to generate. And we're probably surrounded by various gadgets at any given time that is tracking different types of data. And we've been hearing for a long time about how big data can disrupt city building and urban development in general. For many of our audience and maybe even both of us, could you explain a little bit about what it means, what this whole idea of data city means? Why is it so important to establish governance around it? But start with explaining what we should understand by the term data-driven city.
Yeah. I think data-driven cities have been around as long as governments have existed. And what I mean by that is that we use information to create evidence for our policies or policies that we want to enact. And I think we use data as evidence because it seems like truth, fact, or knowledge. It can be uncontested. And it is a great way to, come up with a way to make decisions from everything from crime to, let's say, housing, right? By documenting issues in the city, we can understand the problem and then hopefully resolve it. I guess what I was saying that data-driven cities aren't new is that we have used data and mapping over time to help us understand the world that we live in order to make changes to it. And this is something architects and designers know well. When we go to a site, we map that site, we understand how it's used, and we begin to make policy off of it. I think data-driven cities as a term has become something that we've all gotten excited about as we have unprecedented amounts of data available. And, one example is this Google data set that I mentioned, but, just our mobile phones are collecting data about where we go and travel at every second, what we buy on the internet, who we connect with on Facebook. And there is huge potential in these data sets to understand both the urban realm, but social networks. And I think that we have become really excited about the potential to mine that data to make better decisions for our cities in the future.
Oh,
I was on mute. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you for
Say it again.
explaining that to us, because we keep hearing these buzzwords. It's nice to have a very kind of concise, simple explanation. We've been doing it for ages. Now we just have more tools to make decisions on our urban policies with all types of data. I think that's a great way to kind of think about the data city. Lucy?
Thank you, Sarah. I hugely enjoyed reading your book, Data Action: Using Data for Public Good. It was the book that I'd been looking for all this year, actually, and it's going to be available in December. So viewers can get it very soon from the MIT Press. And as Prathama has pointed out, it's got the connected tag of how to use data as a tool for empowerment rather than oppression. And in your introduction, you described so well how today we have the great potential to directly measure issues at the center of urban planning. So that's including equity, environment, value creation, service provision, public opinion, and the effects of physical form, moreover. And that data analytics and their resulting insights have done huge good in the world, which is so important to remember. And they will do again in future. But as you point out, this is so much acutely the case. It often leaves out women, the poor, ethnic groups, and data collection by those in power in order to control the populace is a story with a really long history. So accordingly, you argue for strategies of data action against the manipulation of data for bad policy decisions with lasting impacts on cities, without much, or in fact, often without any stakeholder input. And you argue for collaboration with policy experts, government, designers, and the public to create trust and co-ownership, which I know that your center has been at the cusp of proactivity in building. So you say quite rightly that using data carries responsibility. It's a big job, and it's a big job to make the work more ethical, but then at the same time build new communities of interest. So can you tell us a little bit about how your data action method, as you describe it, through build it, hack it, share it, and the active creation of data by citizens works?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the heart of the method, really, we believe that building teams to work with data make the most impact in terms of action. And what I mean by that is that, almost all of the projects that I work on involve me, a data scientist and a designer, but I also like to have designers on my team, architects, planners, but then also policy experts in the issues that we seek to answer questions for. And I think there's a number of reasons why teams are really important for taking data to action. I think one reason is that asking the right questions of data is absolutely essential. And these teams coming together can do that. And I think one thing that we see a lot of times, like when IBM or Cisco get involved with like data analytics for cities, is they don't know the questions to ask or the policy implications or how the diverse stakeholders would be effective. And having diverse teams really helps to do that. One example from my own work is a project that we worked on in Nairobi to collect data on informal transit systems. And in that project, we had a policy expert in transportation. We had the government of Nairobi, but also the drivers of the matatus, but then also the local technology community that builds applications. And by including them from the beginning or onset of the project, we created trust between these very diverse actors that are all interested in improving transport in Nairobi. But part of the project was to collect data on this informal transit system, and they trusted the data that we collected. So this combination of groups coming together builds trust, allows you to ask the right questions of data, allows you to take action by building the data collaboratively and together, and then opening that data up through visualizations and mapping and literally like providing it to each other helps people understand, in that case, in the system of matatus, which are the informal buses in Nairobi, see something and expose hidden patterns that might not have otherwise been seen. So while we have this kind of process of what I call data action, which is build it, share it, hack it, I also think at its core, teams of people working together helps both us edit our questions, but also edit our results. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is how, in the past, data analytics have been used to marginalize, and maybe unintentionally so, because the way that we do analytics often holds our biases, right? And so I think having teams also allows us to critique our analytics. So having people on your team that are represented in the data itself helps ensure that our results from our decisions are reflective of what that community feels on the ground.
Good. Lucy, now you are on mute.
We're all doing it, must be catching.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, that's wonderful. Very insightful and great thank you for also flagging up that example. I mean, your data actions, central argument that creating change with data requires collaboration amongst very diverse groups of people to share it is so important to remind everyone again and again, because thereby, and also with your great attention to superior kind of visualizations, with the nuances, bringing those nuanced insights to broad publics. And it also helps close knowledge gaps that are really vital to make decisions for society. And my next question will actually relate to this, and perhaps give you the chance to talk about another example. So I look forward to that. But over to Prathima for her next question.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of explore the, some examples around how data has been used for broader public benefits, even if it comes from private sector and all the sensors that we get from, maybe the automated car or from our phones. Are there examples in any of our cities where this data has been applied to benefit the larger public? Can you just give us some examples about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of like small and large ways that data has been used to help our publics. I would say, one example that comes to mind is a lot of the work that's been happening in cities in the United States, and I know this is happening in the UK, where by opening data up, local technology groups have created applications of city services that are essential or needed that the government has yet to make. So I think an example of that would be, let's just take an example from Boston and here in Massachusetts, but navigating how to use the public school system and where your kid can apply and go to school it's actually very complicated because we still have busing to integrate communities across the city. And so taking data about where students can go and where they can't go, the city of Boston collaborated with some local technologies firms to create an application that makes it easier for parents to make that decision. So it's like, a very small everyday benefit from a larger data set that, let's say, the government provides. But then we have bigger data sets, right? Like about, Google Transport that we all use, or Waze, which tells us about traffic patterns. Those congestion data sets are used by transportation planners every day to optimize and change and really redesign how we navigate our cities. So, you can think from like the smallest scale to this larger scale data sets that are useful in that way. I think another way, which is relevant to today, is public health data. And I think one thing that COVID has exposed is the need to collect this data in a consistent way, both to make sure that we get all populations, all race and class and gender, but that that should be something that maybe is something that needs to be managed by government right now. I know the UK and at least in the US, like that has largely, the data on COVID has been mixed in terms of accuracy on testing, the ways that it's collected. It's something that's organized state by state or even town by town. And I think we're realizing more and more how important having also consistent data points about not just who has COVID, but like race of COVID is also really important to see who's more affected and who's not. So another good example. And I think it's interesting because much of early city development came from the public health field, who really started to analyze cities from the perspective of data to understand disease. And so some of our first, let's say, sewers were created out of evidence, public health data evidence that they were needed because of, let's say, diseases transported in the sewers or getting into the drinking water. So I could talk about so many examples, so I'm going to stop myself. You could get me talking for a whole day about all the great examples.
But okay, I think that's amazing to hear, and it'd be nice to see places that we should look for where municipal governments and leadership are using this data for making innovative urban policy decisions. So are there cities that you recommend that we dig deep into? I know Boston has the urban mechanics.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Boston has a new urban mechanics. I think that one thing is a lot of cities have open data units. There's New America Foundation that looks at this as well. But I would say, I was just before the pandemic in Buenos Aires that has a great amount of data that they're collecting. But I think one thing to remember is that while many cities have an overwhelming amount of data, as I mentioned kind of in the manifesto, there are many cities in the world that are still missing data. And one of the things that I do a lot of work on is collecting that data where it doesn't exist. And I call this like the missing data project in a way. The World Bank produced a report that said many cities in Africa don't have basic vital statistics or information, again, on things like where their transit goes. And so who's missing from the data is just as important as where the data exists.
Yeah, we will look into those examples, especially in South America. Yeah, it'll be great.
Yeah, no, Buenos Aires is a great data set. I mean, I know, obviously, you know, some of the bigger cities like London, Hong Kong, even, I mean, across the world have amazing amounts of data and are doing really innovative work in this area. I mean, I would say particularly Hong Kong does great stuff also in transport and moving their very dense cities around. It's almost essential that they have clear data to do those or make those decisions. But from London to Paris to Singapore, but I guess, like, as I mentioned them, I can think of like numerous examples, but I think also as we advocate for data to be used to improve cities, we have to also advocate for those cities that are often forgotten to also help make sure their data is produced and generated.
You see?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that should really be targeted as a priority for a stream of sustainable finance in the future, to directly support the setting up of open data labs within those cities where the data collection is deficient, and they could get involved in the funding of the training of people involved. For sure. So, going back to this pivotal role of sharing data through really fine visuals that you that is so important to the work of the Civic Data Design Lab. Your multidisciplinary groups of designers and policymakers and teams that working intently to build and visualize and communicate the argument through data. So thinking about one of the more well-known of your projects, the $1 Million Blocks project that is so well recounted in the book, you're working together directly with policymakers. How do you go about this rather delicate process, pragmatic process, but delicate too, how to relay co-created data out directly to the public, and what are some of the issues that are at stake in that decision-making process?
Yeah, I mean, I think sharing data is one of the most powerful ways that we create action, because not everyone can understand the insights in the data itself, right? And so you might be able to open a data set up and share it with anyone to use, but unless they can operationalize it for their own efforts, it's let's say, meaningless. So when we think about sharing data, and in particular, if we take the case of the $1 Million Blocks, if you're not familiar with that project, what we did is we took data about where people lived before they went into prison. In fact, these are databases that are recorded when people enter the prison system. And we mapped block by block how much it costs to incarcerate people from those blocks. And we found in many blocks throughout the city, over $1 million is spent to incarcerate people from those blocks. But same money is not spent on education programs, childcare, reentry programs, some of the systematic things which would hopefully remove these people from the prison system to begin with, should they have better resources to address some of the severe poverty concerns that are exist in those neighborhoods. And the idea in that project was really just to highlight the fact that we kind of throw money at the problem instead of addressing the systemic needs, and that, you know, we spend over $1 million to incarcerate people who will continue to return to prison should these systematic issues not be affected. But you know, the idea was to just highlight that total cost and then let other people take on and identify the policy action they think that should be addressed, because criminal justice system in the United States is very complex. It involves dependency of these prisons upstate for the funds that come, and what are some of the actions that we need to take? So is it actions that are about reentry program, or is it actions in terms of housing and support systems? Is it actions into services for healthcare? And we hope to the maps would really allow people to kind of take that issue on their own, and that's exactly how it has been used. We've seen it used as evidence for policy for reentry funding. We've seen it used for just more recently, this project that's happened almost over 15 years ago have been used in conversations for defunding the police in the United States. But I guess in this particular case, like, what was important was that we knew that the issue of incarceration and the amount of money we spend is extremely complex. It's you know, based on these interdependencies. And as we talked to policy experts, we realized if we provided one single answer, one single solution, you know, we could be marginalizing the potential of these maps to be used by other groups and organizations. And so really we spent a lot of time thinking about how the visualization should just communicate the amount of money to allow people to see and understand that the extent of how much money we spend on incarceration, and to do it at the scale of a block so that people can really feel in touch with it. We can understand what a block is. It's very hard to understand at different scales of data. I think, again, this was really a conversation that we had between the policy expert, the designer, and planners. Myself being a planner and an architect, but my planner hat was like, we need to come up with the policy solution in this data visualization. And, you know, realizing that actually you don't always have to, in a data action project, come up with the answer, but rather create visualizations or communication strategies that allow others to engage in that work and create their own answers. And I think that's one of the reasons that this project was so successful.
Great. I mean, I think we surely now in this day and age, societies are more dependent on visual data narratives than ever before. I mean, this year we've been so dependent on, in some ways, often very badly designed data narratives around public health and corona. But I mean, we've had them, even if there have been some of them poorly put together. You see very bad graphics in newspapers. But I think what you're underlining is the absolute sheer importance in supporting policy arguments, supporting policymakers. It's such a potent area. Prathima.
Yeah, I want to kind of continue on that conversation. And Sally, earlier you mentioned how, you know, open data platforms can enable innovators to build on them. So talk to us a little bit about, you know, how can we bring data into actionable intelligence so citizens can make change happen within their communities? And are there examples of unleashing the power of civic innovators and startups to, you know, problem solve and in a way redistribute public problem solving amongst the ecosystem of citizens and the community of innovators in your in any city. And tell us a bit about the data, the data kind of policy around it, but also what can governments do to enable that ecosystem. Are there examples that we should look to where this has happened more successfully?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the exciting things about the times that we live in is it's all easy for us to be data collectors. And I think in the Build It chapter, I talk a bit about the ways in which citizens can participate in that kind of data collection activities. And specifically, I think you see a lot of examples in environmental issues, right? So where citizens measure the air quality in their community, or they measure like local water quality. And I would say that now more than ever, we can come together as citizens to build that data set. There are DIY sensors. And so some examples that I use in the book is a group of citizens in Pennsylvania that believed that fracking was changing the air quality and causing adverse air quality in their community. And they didn't have the evidence to support that. So they put up air quality network around the town that they lived in, and then were able to generate a data set that showed, in fact, air quality levels in close proximity to the fracking sites was different and worse off than other areas. And by doing that, they actually caused the EPA to come in to do even, let's say, more rigorous air quality measures that, in fact, backed up their analysis and caused certain kinds of controls to be implemented on fracking sites that now exist today. And, that's here we're looking at a very new technology that's often associated with water pollution, but hadn't been previously associated with air pollution as well, in terms of the machines that they were using. And data was created to evidence to do that. And you can see citizens doing that. I think what's also really exciting about these kinds of data projects is that they build communities, to take that action, right? So it's not just like I'm measuring my air quality, but I'm building a team of people that I work with, and we're all interested in this together. And how can we come together to take the action that we need? Another great example from the book about that is measuring radiation in Japan after the earthquake, which, if people remember, a few years back, there was an earthquake, or actually tsunami, and earthquake that impacted an area near a nuclear power plant. And there were devices, DIY data collection devices that were made to measure the radiation that citizens and the public throughout and around the area kind of built and implemented, because there wasn't enough enough openly available government data for them to access about the levels of radiation. And again, that group created their own community to help force the government to take action, because they had the evidence they needed to do so.
Yeah, I think those are great examples of how we can collectively problem solve on some of these issues that we face in all our cities. Lucy?
So right, so Sarah, you are both at the same time. You're trained as an urban planner, a geographer, and in landscape architecture, and so it makes complete sense that a really key narrative in your book is about the history of technocratic planning, the way in which, and you tell the story so interestingly, the way that it collected extensive data and used it for evidence for zoning plans, for wherever in New York City and so on, which is an approach really professionalized by figures who had an interest in promoting central business districts rather than social equity, emphasized slum removal, highways, overlooking after local community neighborhoods. And then the neighborhoods were further marginalized by planning, moreover, the removal of African-American neighborhoods. And you say that the problematic ways in which city planners employed data in the past is a legacy that directly helped facilitate the systematic segregation of US cities. And then, of course, you move on to talking about the sterling work of social activists like Jane Jacobs and Herbert J. Gans, who were, by contrast, they were interested in qualitative data, including the public's perspectives, which is absolutely vital. Jane Jacobs subscribed to social networks of people, well, what make a city a great place. So if we bring that right up to today, you mentioned the Google Sidewalks Lab developing smart city solutions. Are such private sector initiatives very numerous in that sense? And are they wholly technocratic? And how do you try to influence private sector initiatives? The individuals behind them, by asking, as you say, it's very vital to do in your book, does this analysis ring true to them? Or does it reflect our own biases about the communities we serve to help? I know that's a mega question, but it's digging into the kind of smart city kind of cliche with analysis of technocratic behaviors.
Yeah, such a good question.
Oh, thank you.
And I think, it's so interesting because I think the interest or involvement of corporations in the development of cities has this long history too. Right, like this idea of smart cities comes out of IBM originally. I would say even in the 50s, and its legacy is about applying post-war technologies to cities as a client. So I think many of, let's say, whether it's IBM, Cisco, Sidewalk Labs, and Google, they're interested in thinking about how they can service cities, and they see themselves being, like using their knowledge of data and so forth to provide that service. And I think that's like, it's such a great idea, but what I think is often missing from it is like the knowledge of the questions or things that are important to answer now by cities. So I guess like one good example I can think of is, Sidewalk Labs, has a lot of sensors they want to put up in their Toronto site, which is now defunct. But like what those sensors would be used for, or how they would be operationalized, or what kinds of questions that they would answer with those sensors was often not fully thought out. And I think that is because perhaps a lack of connection to those in government that need certain kinds of questions answered. So it's like this kind of division between what we need to answer as governments versus like a need to provide a service or give cities a service of action. But if we look back at technocratic planners, I think they very much operationalize data and use it as evidence to see their vision of the city, and a vision, as you said, which was not focusing on those on the margins. I think in this case, we are having a company or somebody try to sell a service they will serve the objective of whatever city that they intend to work with. And I think what's important as they do that is to remember that the city represents all people, not just the interests of those that will be able to afford autonomous vehicles. So rather, I think that we could be led to the missteps of the past should we not question the objective of the data analysis that we're doing today. And I think there's a lot of potential for Sidewalk Labs to do really great work and like amazing work in this area. Should we make sure that we're thinking about all of the publics? And so in a way, I'm very excited at the potential for them to address things. And I think it's up to us to make sure that we put on the agenda that Sidewalk Labs should address these things. So should they take autonomous vehicles on and say to themselves, well, how do we make sure autonomous vehicles are available to everyone, and come up with and use data to help make that happen? So where are communities that might not be able to afford them? Where should we provide subsidies for that? So I hope and I believe that Sidewalk Labs can be used in that way should we ask those questions. But it's up to the cities that work with Sidewalk Labs to make sure those right questions are asked, I think. And it's up to us as the public to ask our cities to make sure that happens.
Yes, yeah, you're dead right, absolutely. And whether that's that implemented in the form of certain regulations, or it should be more of a mature conversations through partnering arrangements.
Yeah,
but definitely different questions should be asked.
And I think also like what's important here is like we often talk about, okay, Sidewalk Labs and others are coming from the top and they're controlling our data and there's data privacy issues. And I agree, but I think it's really up to us as planners to make sure we get in there and make the changes, right? And so work with them exactly as you say, as partners. Let's think about how we can partner to improve the process rather than only critiquing. So we can critique the way that we think that they're using data inappropriately, but if we don't set out some ways in which they can change that, we're setting ourselves up for repeating history, I guess, without really activating some kind of real change.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all incumbent upon how those relationships are brokered. So I'm mindful that we've got a few minutes left. So we're kind of, let's move swiftly on to Prathima's next question. Thank you very much.
And I want to, take a moment to say hello to the audience that is joining us. And, if you have any questions for Sarah, please post it in the video comment box below, and we'll try to take at least one today because we're already running out of time. Sarah, I want to talk to you about the role of kind of open source data sharing platform that can, that can be set up by the city, and how crucial that is to unleash, problem solving, or, how crucial it is to enable civic innovation in that city. And I know in Boston, the new urban mechanics actively tries to kind of engage with the citizenry to come up with some, solutions. So can you talk to us a little bit about why open, data sharing platforms are important, and give us an example of cities that are that have been successful in really employing these data strategies in a way that will bring everybody together, ensure diversity and inclusion.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest reasons that we have open data is that we need transparency in government. And this, having knowledge about cities and systems is essential for the public to make informed decisions, and should open data allows that kind of transparency and trust between government, private sector, and the public. I think some cities that have done great job at working towards open data. Boston is a key one, Philadelphia, even San Francisco and LA. And I think that what I think has been important there, though, is also when the city provides also an education on how to use that data, you see, or promotes that data or promotes the use of it, you see it going much further. So when you create, like in New York City, they had every year, let's say like a hackathon or competition that uses open data sets. I think one concern in the open data movement or the civic technology movement, though, is that, we're asking private organization or private groups or private nonprofits to make solutions that the city should be developing. And I think that's one critique that you see in this. So I think it's great that we have open data, and it's absolutely fantastic that we have so many civic activists interested in it. But it's also, we can't forget that government should still be involved. So as you said, when there's an organization or like a center that's in the government that helps facilitate this, I think that's when the projects turn out to be a lot more substantial. And so these are many cities that have, let's say, innovation labs, that part of that innovation lab is outreaching to private sector, to public sector. And so my advice to cities who are interested in that kind of innovation is to really think about that. It's not just making it open that creates the kinds of outcomes we want, but it's by making it open, by facilitating that openness through education and knowledge to build on top of it.
Thanks, Sarah. Lucy? You're on mute again. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna ask you, Sarah, now about one area I'm personally very interested in, which is about community mapping, or another word for it is VGI. That's the acronym Volunteered Geographic Information. What, in layman's terms, what it is, and in what ways do you reckon that it has so far helped us to understand new emerging socio-spatial phenomena? I mean, one example is obviously OpenStreetMap, which was developed 16 years ago. An amazing initiative. I mean, how do you rate how effectively it's enabled public goods since then, and other community mapping projects?
I mean, I think OpenStreetMaps is actually an absolutely incredible undertaking. I mean, and really, created out of London. In fact, like it's very hard to get open data about the streets in the UK, and Steve Coast, who created OpenStreetMaps, said, well, we all see the streets and we can collect this data ourselves. Like, can I just start to build a site that brings people together to crowdsource this a global map? I mean, how incredible and ambitious that thought is. And he did in fact do it. And I think one of the things that OpenStreetMaps does that's so exciting is it also builds community around the data collection. We just did an OpenStreetMaps party in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia that added all of the transportation stops, and I think it builds community around those transportation actors, but then allowed the city of Addis to actually now have an application that allows you to route yourself on the informal transit system there, right? So you go from like something that just was there to collect a street to something that helps build community around a shared need or a data set to something that then turns into a useful tool. And I think that's what's so exciting about community mapping projects. Is it allows the citizen to make that change from their perspective. I think one thing though with volunteer geographic information systems or volunteer geographic data is the completeness of the data. And I think sometimes the data doesn't have to, as a data enthusiast, it's hard to say this, but data doesn't always have to be complete. It is about this community building. And I think OpenStreetMap that is hard, wanted a complete data set, but understood let's build it together and incrementally over time, it can be something that we verify as more complete, but it'll start out piecemeal. I feel like we can't forget that kind of building process as being important to community mapping.
Great, fantastic. That's really insightful. Prathima?
Do we have time for one last question, or do we have to wrap up? I know we're over the hour, but I want to quickly ask you, can I do that, Lucy? I think we can take a couple of more minutes, Sarah, if you're...
Sure.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about data philanthropy, with, our private companies giving back in meaningful ways by providing data for public good, especially for, creating more responsive, resilient cities and to benefit academic research. I know Uber, for example, has an open, data platform in some of its cities. So are you seeing some of that happen with private companies?
Yeah, I think that private companies are really interested in this idea of data philanthropy, but are having trouble figuring out exactly how to do it. And I think this is an area that we need to work on. And I think like another good example recently is MasterCard Center for Social Inclusion, which just had its launched data.org, which is meant to use data to understand the challenges of those on the margins. And I think where you see most data philanthropy happening is where big companies like MasterCard or Uber provide funding, let's say, to create assistance in data analysis that might help those on the margins, but maybe they're not necessarily opening up their own data or sharing it. In the case of Uber, they do share, let's say, an aggregated version of it. And I think the reason that we don't see more, let's say, data sharing happening is because of many privacy concerns associated with it. And I think that's the one area that we need to work on. How can we, because I think these companies do in fact want to share their data, but at the same time, they're scared of, let's say, what other legal ramifications can come from that. And so it's really important for us to think about ways to help them do that work. I think another example is like Facebook for Good. They have an extensive amount of data that could be really used to do good in the world. But again, very scared or nervous or risk adverse in sharing that data with others. And so I think it's a problem for us to help these larger companies think about in the future.
Sarah, this has been such a fascinating conversation, and it's so nice to see you virtually, and I hope we can come and visit you in your lab someday soon.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for inviting me. It's been great talking to you about the book. And I like really the thoughtful questions. I could tell you really read through it, so that makes me feel wonderful. And I hope that everybody who tuned in today could really think about how they can use data in action to help their communities, even from the smallest to the biggest data set.
Yeah, it's Sarah, it's been a real pleasure. And honestly, I think your book, and I have already said this to many of my friends. It's one of the most useful books that I've read all year. I mean,
That's
we're talking about, I mean, it's a topic that deserves to be far better known about, not just on a superficial level, but it's not so tricky to get to grips with the terminology and the concepts. I don't think. I mean, it's like any discipline, but data for community building, data for steering policy, steering improvements, defining policy, making improvements more aware, people more aware of improvements to neighborhoods, showing people how they can play a really positive role. I mean, the benefits are myriad, but I realize there's a vast amount of work that you and your center members have put into this thus far. So I think, we pay tribute to what you've achieved, and we're convinced your book will be a huge success. So we really give you the best of luck with the book and with all your work.
Thank you so much. Thanks. It's so nice to hear. Sure. We're really excited.
Yeah, thank you again. So it seems since we feel quite sad, we should come finally to close the session because there's just so much more to say. But I thank you once again hugely, and I should flag up the fact that next week's session is on another very important topic, nature-based design. That's Tuesday, the 1st of December, with the Danish principal of SLA in Copenhagen, Aarhus, and Oslo, landscape designer Mette. How do you pronounce her surname, Prof? Sorry?
Mette Skold, I think.
Skold. Yeah. She'll correct us anyway. We'll figure it out before next week. But she's a real pioneer in the field, and we really look forward to speaking to her. But Sarah, once again, thank you tremendously for your great insights. We really loved it, and I'm sure our audience did too. Thank you.
Great, guys.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. See you soon next week.
Bye.
Bye.